Good morning, everyone. I am Jenn Calabrese from Calabrese Consulting, and with me today I have Ed Keck from Withum, and our topic today is cybersecurity for microcaps, so secure, smart, and scalable. In particular, just kind of focusing on how cybersecurity really plays into the microcap industry. My firm, Calabrese Consulting, we are a financial and accounting advisory firm, assisting with a lot of the small cap and micro cap companies with their financial reporting, SEC reporting, IPO readiness, and audit readiness. Ed, I don't know if you want to give a quick introduction.
Sure. So I'm Ed Keck. I'm the partner and the practice leader for the National Cybersecurity practice at Withum. Withum is a advisory tax and audit firm serving multiple business niches, primarily on the East Coast and the West Coast of the United States. And I've been in the cybersecurity and enterprise risk space for just over 30 years.
Great. All right. So I guess to get started, Ed, we hear about security, privacy, and data governance, but what do microcaps really need to focus on, and why is early stage cybersecurity planning so important?
So before we talk specifically about microcaps, I brought my iPad up with me because there were a couple of numbers that I just didn't want to forget, okay?
Okay.
And it's important for people to realize in 93% of all hacking events, the hacker is able to get into the organization. So think about that for a minute. They are successful 93% of the time.
Wow.
If they want to get into your organization, okay? The second thing is that 43% of all hacking attacks in the last 12 months in the latest survey were targeted at small businesses.
Wow, that's incredible.
So the notion that this is a problem for large companies or only for companies where there's a high concentration of personal information or payment information is no longer the case.
Right.
Hackers are looking at any company where they can make money off of the information that you have. Whether that's your IP and they can tie it up with a ransomware attack and you can no longer do business, okay? Or if you're, a small healthcare biomedical company and you might even be pre-revenue and you're going through trials, right?
Right.
You have tons of personal information that's available. If that information is exposed, the breach itself is one problem,
Right.
but your reputation's shot.
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
And you haven't even made it to revenue stage yet,
Right.
right? So it's critical for microcaps and startups to be focused on the security they need
Right.
for the stage of the business they're in. And one of the things that in my career that I've done is I worked with I had the pleasure of being kind of the fractional chief risk officer for a startup payments company, and I worked with them all the way to national launch.
Okay.
That payments company was acquired, and you now know them as Google Wallet. Okay? But I worked with them from the beginning when they were literally 3 people trying to figure out what their vision was and laying out, here's the security you need, here's what data are you going to have, let's have a plan in place based on your business model
Right.
for what you need and when you need it.
Right.
And that's why it's so important to have that plan up front, because it's no longer an issue for large companies, it's an issue for any company where there's information that's of value.
Right. Okay. So taking that into account, right? So larger companies often have dedicated personnel developing the security plans. But how do microcap organizations then approach the planning, and how does that approach differ from these larger companies?
So for microcap companies, they should still have the same focus, right? They need to know what their security risks are.
Okay.
They need to know what their security posture is, right? They need to know how much risk they're willing to take on. So the approach differs a little bit. The way you execute that approach is what really changes,
Okay.
right? So for a microcap company, I would look for them to have a fractional chief security officer or a fractional chief risk officer, okay? Someone that has the expertise in the space, can keep management, the board of directors, the investors up to date on, here's our real risk, here's the actions we're taking, and here's the plan for how we're going to address this risk.
Right.
And be able to lay out that plan, work with them to lay it out, and then say, okay, where are we in keeping up with the plan? But you don't need someone, 12 hours a day, 5 days a
Right.
week to be your CISO.
Right, you don't need a full-time
You don't need a
person.
full-time person. You probably have someone inside that's doing your IT work. They can execute on a plan. The other thing is, don't hesitate to leverage sourced managed security services,
Right,
because it's very economical for what you can get. You can get 24-hour, 7-day a week, 365-day a year monitoring for very little that will keep you protected while you're developing and while you're moving forward. And then if you have a fractional CISO or a fractional risk officer that can say, yes, we're in the right spot,
Right.
that's really kind of the approach that I see a lot of microcap organizations starting to take. And it benefits them well as they grow, because when you're looking for investment, when you're looking to grow the organization, showing that you have paid attention to that space goes a long way with investors.
and I guess that's especially true with the pre-revenue
Yes.
companies, or even the ones that, like you said, are in clinical trials, right?
Yes,
Because
absolutely.
they, again, the information they have is very sensitive, not only from the perspective of this is what we're trying to accomplish in our clinical trials, but the underlying information of all the people that are part of those trials.
Right. And if you think about a company like that, they really have, I call it kind of it's the perfect storm, right?
Right.
Let's assume for a moment that the device or the drug that they're testing is going to be successful, okay? They have a treasure trove of intellectual property
Okay, yeah,
that, they have to protect.
right,
On top of that, they might be doing clinical trials in the United States. Those may have been successful, so now they move to the EU
got it,
or to the UK,
right. So now you
and there's a
become
difference, okay? Now there's a difference since Brexit, right? So now you have to deal with US privacy laws,
international. Right,
EU privacy laws, UK privacy laws, and if you go to South America or to Asia or to India or anywhere else, you have to be able to deal with the controls necessary to protect information in each of those countries. And in some of those jurisdictions, you have to pay attention to, where am I storing the data?
Right.
Do I anonymize it before I move it back to the United States? You need this is where a chief security officer, a chief data protection officer, a privacy officer comes in, even as fractional, comes in very handy, because they'll understand those nuances
Right.
and be able to help you create a program to address all of it so that you don't end up in trouble with any of those jurisdictions.
got it, okay. Yeah, because each jurisdiction, I guess, has their own
Yes.
unique requirements and
They do.
needs that you have to really address.
They do.
Okay, all right. So cybersecurity controls seems to be constantly evolving, right?
Yes.
And changing based on new emerging threats. How important is it to create a cybersecurity program that's actually scalable?
That's critical, right? And that's, that kind of brings everything together, where we've talked about, you have a fractional CISO, you have, how can you protect yourself? The first two questions you asked, it all comes together in that plan.
Right.
Okay? And that plan really is a roadmap. And that roadmap, the first thing I'll say is, if your security partner isn't talking to you about your business, you've got the wrong security partner.
Right.
Okay? Because even though this is about risk and it's about controls and it's about, ransomware and all those things, the risks that are in front of you are because of the business you're doing.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
So if they're not asking you where you're at in your business life cycle, if they're not asking you what your strategic plan is for the next 12 to 36 months, right? They're missing the boat.
Right.
And then what that plan should look like is, when you're starting out and when JVL Payments, which later became Google Wallet, when they were starting out, it was literally 3 people in a little office in New York City, okay?
Right.
And the CEO, when he interviewed me for the position to see if I would be a fit, the phrase I used with him is, it's not a light touch of security, because that won't do.
Right.
And you're certainly not Citibank.
Right.
So you don't need everything they have. But what you need is, I said, think of it, this is like a logistics problem.
Right.
It's the right touch.
Right,
Okay?
okay.
What do you need? When do you need it? Okay? Because that organization, whether it's security, whether it's data protection,
Right.
your IT staff, it's all going to look different 6 months from now. It's going to look different when you go to trials. It's going to look different when you go to national launch. It's going to look different when you're post-revenue.
Right.
Okay? And then, as the company grows, it's going to look different again. So it's okay up front for people to wear multiple hats.
Okay,
As
right.
long as there's a segregation of those duties, right?
right?
But then as you grow, that has to become, this individual's responsible, right?
Right, right.
And being able to map out that change is critical. Now, I've seen it on the security side. I'm sure on the advisory side for corporations, you've seen it kind of across the board. So, I mean, is that similar to what you're seeing, or?
Yeah, it is actually. What we're seeing, when we go in and start talking with a company in terms of what their cybersecurity controls and their internal controls for IT look like as well, we see a lot of the companies that are just starting out. And like you said, it's very important to have that communication and that back and forth and that comfort level to be able to speak to them and to really kind of hold their hand and say, okay, this is what you have. Where do you want to be? What are you looking like? And then let's find a good fit. Let's assess those controls, both at the cybersecurity and the IT side, to really help identify the risks that they have that could pose a threat and make you very vulnerable.
Right.
And then making sure that that plan in place is flexible enough so that as they grow, it is something that can evolve, right? So you always want it to be, the controls you always want it to be commensurate to the size of the company itself and help mitigate those risks as much as possible.
Yep. There's the overused phrase, but it's the appropriate one, is the controls should be appropriate for the size and complexity of the organization,
yes,
right?
Exactly.
And most people go, oh yeah, everybody says that. Well, everybody does say it.
Right, but it's so true.
It's so true, but the trick is finding an organization
Right.
that can understand where you're at in the business cycle and
Yes.
knows what that really looks like.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, that is exactly what we see as well.
Right, and it's very important that when you're going through that process, not only for management of the company itself, but for their advisors to always be in constant communication. I find that one of the things that's very helpful is, as us, as Calabrese Consulting is helping with the microcap companies, helping them develop their plan, always having that open line of communication with the auditors as well, because we want to make sure that whatever plan we put in place or whatever we think is the appropriate path is something that we all agree on, that yes, it makes sense, because putting something in place and then all of a sudden finding out later on, it wasn't the best solution, and then you're back to square one. So
Right.
having that communication across the board and having that good relationship really does help.
Yes, absolutely. And we see that when we're doing, when we're supporting kind of managed cyber services. If there's
Right.
another IT provider, a lot of times, or when we're designing a program, We have to make sure that we're communicating to make sure they can
Yeah.
support that program, right?
Exactly, yes.
Because it's one thing to say, oh, you should have this in place.
Right.
It's another thing to be able to go execute on it, right?
Right, exactly.
So I agree, communication is critical.
Right,
At that
and
point.
like you said, it has to be realistic as
Yes.
well, right? So again, whatever plan you think is correct, you have to also make sure that you can execute on it, and that's
Yes.
not something that's out of their reach.
Right.
Both, from an ability point of view and also from an economic point of view, too.
Correct.
Again, taking into account that the microcaps are very cost-conscious at this point in time.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
So microcaps often focus on advancing their product service development without considering security controls. What are the risks or the costs of really having that type of inaction?
So the risk can be significant.
Right,
Another couple of numbers. 90% of business executives, if you ask them if their security plan in their corporation is appropriate, the answer is yes.
right,
Okay? 25% of those organizations have not even installed basic security controls like anti-malware, okay? Or turned on two-factor authentication.
right,
Or put in screening for spam and things like that.
right,
So think about that. 25% of the organizations out there, regardless of size,
right,
don't have firewalls, they're flying, naked on the internet, right?
Which is like a very basic thing, I think,
Very
that you should
basic
have.
things, right? That risk to a microcap company is very real. So we had an organization, was not our client prior to their cyber event. They were referred to us to help them remediate their cyber event.
Okay,
The managing partner of this organization took their laptop, went home, small company, about 25 people, okay?
right,
Got home, flipped open the laptop, started doing some work. Their son was in his bedroom
Okay.
doing what teenagers always do, gaming away, right?
right, of course.
The hacker, blind luck, agree 100% this is blind luck, but got on the son's laptop, right, because he's out gaming,
Right.
no controls, things like that. They go onto the Wi-Fi where everyone's sharing the same space,
Oh.
and guess what they find? They find the business laptop sitting there, which is now connected to
The Wi-Fi.
the organization,
Yes,
okay? They infected that organization, and the result was about $5 million in ransomware and remediation expenses,
wow,
all because they weren't prepared.
right,
And here's the kicker to this one. The insurance company was fighting the claim because it wasn't the organization's network that was breached. They were on, in essence, a public Wi-Fi network at the time, so they didn't feel that they should pay.
wow,
So we got engaged to, A, help with the claim.
right,
So one of our incident response experts wrote up an entire opinion around, why this happened. They really did have the right, and eventually they got some of the money, okay? But then they engaged us to help remediate. But they were $5 million in.
Wow.
Now you think about a microcap,
yeah,
maybe they're pre-revenue. Do you have $5 million laying around that you can
Yeah.
just go, here you go?
right. All
right?
because you take your
All
laptop to
because,
work
right?
from home.
Yes. So, a couple of things. It's a material risk for every organization. There are things you can do, basic blocking and tackling, that will keep you much safer. And you need to make sure those things are in place, right? So, firewalls in your offices, scanning your emails, multi-factor authentication, endpoint protection, those types of things, those need to be there. But then, as you look at this, understand that the cost, and there's a cost associated with all of that, right?
Of course, yes.
And that's where, as you said, it's you have to balance that cost, but also understand that if you have an event, the cost to remediate a cyber event and respond to that event is 6 to 8 times greater than if you would have proactively put the controls in place.
Right.
So if someone like me comes to you with a bill that says, okay, for $10,000 we can put your program in place,
Right.
and then it's going to cost you this much a month to have these controls in your environment. Okay, think about that and think, okay, well, if I have to call Ed 6 months from now, that's not going to be a $10,000 bill. It's going to be an $80,000 bill, right?
Yes.
The numbers are staggering and the bigger you get, the bigger that spread becomes.
Right.
And then that doesn't include reputational impacts or any impacts you have on investors or things like that. And you may end up, if it was a breach of personal information or healthcare information, you may end up having to offer everyone that was part of that exposed data identity theft protection for the next 3 years, right? Those are all costs that just continue to add up. So it's significant, and it's about 6 to 8 times greater than being proactive.
Right, and I think people don't understand or don't realize the importance of having those controls in place. So, you look at it and you say, yeah, maybe we don't really need it, or I've got, like the multi-factor authentication and I'm okay with that. But really, you really have to take it seriously. It's such an important topic. It's such an important thing to really be cognizant of. We're seeing a lot more in terms of regulations coming out and disclosures coming out about it as well. So it's something to take very seriously and to really have that conversation and make sure it's really done properly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We recently had an organization that they were about 20 or 30 people in size. Right? And they said, we don't need multi-factor on our email or anything like that if we're remote. Well, one Tuesday morning, one of my executive advisors calls me and they said, hey Ed, we just heard from this client. Apparently, someone is in their email and they're sending out emails as the CEO.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Yes.
So then multi-factor got turned on, but we had to scramble, we had to check logs. All of those clients that got emails are now thinking, what's going on?
Right, exactly.
There wasn't material financial damage, but there was some reputational damage with them and the CEO having to explain what was going on.
What happened, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Yes, if anybody has any questions. Or not?
Yeah, I'm in the insurance game, right? So selfishly motivated to have this conversation. I often find Microcap, right? Pre-revenue or not a lot of budget. When you get to cyber insurance, it's amazing. I speak pretty loud. It's amazing to me, and they got a lot going on. They don't have a dedicated risk manager, never mind, as you say, a fractional chief risk officer or CISO. It stymies me how they don't even look at the policy. So that issue could have been resolved with a proper vendor or broker. And this is not an infomercial. This is spending a little time on 2 policies that matter greatly, D&O and now the cyber insurance. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I agree completely. And when you talk about cyber insurance, and I didn't mean to give insurance agencies a bad rep, right? When you think about cyber insurance, you need to focus on 2 things. Number one, every policy comes with a list of thou shalts, as I call it. So you should have 2-factor authentication. You should have a firewall. You should have this. Before you sign off and say, yes, I can afford this $2 million policy, and you pay the premium, make sure you've got those things in place because, well, if you don't, it's going to be difficult to file a claim. Second of all, make sure that before you just say, I'll take a $2 million policy because that's the baseline, understand what your real business impact is, because you might need $10 million. And before you say, I can't afford that, think about a ransomware attack where suddenly you can't get your data back. Which one are you really not able to afford, right? So I always counsel people, understand what your real impact is if you're not able to do business for a week or 2 weeks or whatever when you're sizing the policy. Don't just grab a default policy.
Right.
But I think those are critical. I agree.
So are there things that we can do from a macro point of view? Are there things we could do from a more macro point of view and almost make security a utility in some instances? You know, there's things that everybody needs. So are there ways to sort of, just like we have Wi-Fi, you know, when you sign up for that, just have it at that point where there's some basic protections put in place that are easier to upkeep with updates, new ransomware that comes out, new malware, because to me it seems like very piecemeal, so it's difficult to kind of keep up on all of these things.
Yep, so not an infomercial, as you said, but what I would tell you is to look for, especially a microcap, if you don't have your own internal IT staff, look for a service provider that can provide you an entire technology stack that covers not only your managed IT services where your systems are being patched, but also the security side of that.
Right.
If you do have an internal IT group, there are service providers out there that deliver what we call a flex option, where your internal staff can handle all the level one
Right, the basic
work,
stuff. Yeah.
but you buy the IT stack with all the components for protection, and that can literally cost less than $50 a month per computer.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're going to be very well covered. Nothing's foolproof, but yeah.
Yeah, that's what we do within our own firm is we have an internal IT person, and he takes care of the basic things. You hire someone, they get a laptop. You know, they leave, we get it back.
Yep.
But then we also have an outside IT firm itself that they take care of the security. So once the laptop is set up, they go in and they do all the security things and make sure everything is really set in place. So that's something that is actually a pretty good solution.
Because one number I didn't throw out there was 63% of all those events that occur are a result of an unpatched system.
Right.
Okay? So whether it's your laptop or whatever, if you keep them up to date, if you have basic protections on them, the hackers will tend to look somewhere else unless they think you really have something of value. They'll poke and they'll move on because it's easier to get into someone else's.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
If you have questions for Jen or Ed, grab them as they're walking out.